Have you ever stopped to think, why do I feel broke even though I have a good salary? You look at your bank account and feel a strange weight, not because the number is in the red, not because you're broke, but because it doesn't reflect your effort. You work hard, you put in overtime, you deliver results, you receive praise, and yet at the end of the month, you feel poor. Not on paper, but inside, as if the money is slipping through your fingers. And worse, you don't even know where. Today we're going to talk about that. Not with spreadsheets, not with guilt, but with a conversation you may have been putting off for years. Breathe, because this isn't about math, it's about behavior. Let me ask you a question. When was the last time you bought something and felt peace? Not euphoria, not that 3-minute dopamine rush, but peace. The feeling that it made sense, that you were in control, that the money was working for you and not the other way around. Think about it, because if you're honest, most of your purchases don't come from peace. They come from anxiety beforehand. They come from justification during, and they come from guilt afterward. And sometimes they come from an emptiness that's hard to explain. An emptiness that you try to fill with the next purchase, and the cycle begins again. Now let me tell you something that might hurt a little, but it's not judgment, it's clarity. Maybe you're not financially broken, but there's a good chance that you're emotionally broken, and the money is just the symptom. I'm going to tell you something almost no one talks about. You don't feel poor because you overspend. You overspend because you feel poor. Let this in, because feeling poor isn't about your bank balance. It's about inadequacy. It's about the constant feeling of being behind, of not having done enough, of not being enough, of needing to prove something. And when you feel like that, you compensate. We live in strange times. Earning more money has never been so possible. And at the same time, it has never been so insufficient. You get a raise. You improve your standard of living. You change your car. You move to a different neighborhood. You frequent different places. And suddenly, you are surrounded by people who earn even more. And that feeling of now I've arrived lasts a week. Then it evaporates. This has a name, social comparison. But I prefer to call it the invisible race, because you run, and you never arrive. The finish line moves, always. And without realizing it, you start spending not on what you need, but on what it symbolizes. Status, belonging, validation, recognition. You don't buy the object, you buy the feeling of being in the game. But there's a problem. This game has no end. And while you try to keep up with the external standard, your inner peace is left behind. There's a very dangerous belief that almost everyone carries. When I earn more, things will get better. But let me ask you honestly, how many times have you actually increased your income? And how many times has your feeling of scarcity truly gone away? In most cases, what increases isn't peace of mind. It's the standard. You start outsourcing everything. Delivery becomes routine. Uber becomes automatic. Services you never needed become necessities. And you justify it. But I can afford it. And you can. But that's not the right question. The right question is, are you buying convenience? Or are you buying mental relief? Because often, what seems like practicality is just a way to avoid facing internal disorganization. Planning takes work. Thinking takes work. Saying no takes work. Spending is quick, and quick seems like control. But it's not. And here's where something deeper comes in. The higher your standard of living, the greater the fear of falling. You're not afraid of earning little. You're afraid of going backwards, of seeming to have regressed, of disappointing expectations, of losing status. So you maintain the standard, even when it suffocates you. And that's why people who earn a lot still feel broken. Because the problem was never income. It was relationships. So let me propose something different. I'm not going to give you a spreadsheet. I'm not going to tell you to cut everything. because that doesn't solve what's behind it. What solves it is breaking the automatic cycle, because today a large part of your money goes away without you really being present. And what I want to teach you isn't about controlling pennies, it's about regaining awareness. It starts with something simple, not financial, mental. Every time your salary arrives, before paying for anything, before spending anything, stop, breathe, and ask yourself, what part of this isn't already mine? Just that question changes everything, because you start to see that balance isn't freedom. Part of it is already a commitment. When you mentally separate what is an obligation from what is a choice, anxiety decreases. And when anxiety decreases, the impulse loses strength. Another thing, you don't need to stop buying. You need to stop buying automatically. So create a small ritual. Nothing complicated. Whenever something non-essential comes up, wait. Even if it's just a day, even if it's just a few hours, that space between impulse and action is where financial maturity is born. And you'll notice something curious. Many desires don't survive the test of time. The ones that do, those are the ones that make sense. And when you buy after awareness, there's no guilt, there's responsibility. And that completely changes your relationship with money. See, it's not about restricting, it's about waking up. Look, money matters, security matters, comfort matters. It would be naive to pretend they don't. Money pays the bills. Money buys time. Money reduces real, tangible stress. But there is something that matters more than money itself. The feeling of enough. And almost no one talks about that. Because we've been trained to chase more income, more lifestyle, more recognition, more validation. But we were never taught how to recognize when something is enough. Real wealth isn't infinite accumulation. Real wealth is no longer feeling constantly behind. It's not waking up with the sensation that you're losing an invisible race. It's not comparing your behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reel. It's being able to look at your life, imperfect, still unfolding, and say, for now, this is enough. Not perfect, not finished, not permanent, but enough for this season of your life. There's a very specific kind of peace in that realization. Because when you allow enough to be a legitimate place to stand, you step out of emotional scarcity. You stop operating like someone who is always trying to arrive somewhere that keeps moving. And when you step out of the invisible race, something truly shifts. You don't need to prove as much. You don't need to impress as much. You don't need to use consumption as a language to say, I made it, I belong, I'm worthy. Because your worth is no longer attached to what you display. And do you know what happens when that internal shift takes place? Money stops disappearing. Not because you became extreme, not because you turned rigid or cold, but because you became aware. You begin to notice when you want to buy something out of joy and when you want to buy something out of insecurity. You begin to see the difference between something that adds value and something that simply distracts you. And most importantly, you stop leaking emotional energy through consumption. Because many times, the problem isn't the price of what you're buying. It's the intention behind it. When the intention changes, the flow changes. Money stops being anesthesia. It stops being compensation. It stops being escape. And it returns to what it was always meant to be. A tool to build, a tool to protect, a tool to expand your life, but never a substitute for self-worth, never a substitute for belonging, never a substitute for peace. Because peace isn't something you finance, it's something you cultivate. And when you understand that, you realize that true financial freedom doesn't start in your bank account, it starts in your mind. And when your mind finds sufficiency, your money finally finds direction. So today, as before going to sleep, don't look at the balance. Look at the pattern. Ask yourself, am I using the money to build or to compensate? Because when you understand this, you stop chasing and you start building with intention, with clarity, with awareness. And that's exactly what we do here at MB. We don't just talk about money. We talk about mind. Because in the end, what controls the money is the mind you train. So remember this, train your mind, or your impulses will train you. See you in the next video.